Chapter 1361, Joint Operation, Pontiff. Danitz jumped in fright, nearly unable to believe the revelation he had received. If it wasn't for the fact that this order directly came from Mr. Fool, he would have definitely cursed. Of course, if the person opposite him was Gehrman Sparrow, he would suck it up. The intel supervisor of the Church of the Sea God saw that Lord Danitz's expression was rather odd. This left him a little afraid.
Lord Oracle, is there anything else?
Danitz retracted his thoughts and forced a smile.
Pay close attention to the development at the Cathedral of Waves.
Yes, Lord Oracle.
The intel supervisor heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly bowed to bid farewell. Danitz turned his head and looked at Alger Wilson as he said, with a brilliant smile,
Mr. Fool has already issued a revelation.
Alger didn't hesitate. He immediately stood up and pressed his right palm against his left chest. O histo shishmi chapar? Danitz straightened his back and solemnly said,
God said that from this day forth, Alger shall wear a mask and become the pontiff of the Church of the Sea God.
Mr. Fool's will is my will.
Alger couldn't hide his smile as he bowed. Half of his smile was for Danitz to see, showing his humility, while the other half was from the bottom of his heart. This was because the revelation meant two things. Mr. Fool and the Lord of Storms had reached a certain agreement. With a tacit understanding, his betrayal would no longer be pursued. Of course, he had to wear masks and use a fake name to prevent humiliation to the Church of Storms. Becoming the pontiff of the Church of the Sea God was a critical step to reaching the throne of Sea God. From Alger's point of view, this meant that he had officially become Mr. Fool's subordinate. In the future, be it the exchange for the identity of Sea God or being the leader of the Church of the Fool, there would be plenty of opportunities. As for Mr. Fool, he was a great existence that was at the same level as a true god, or even higher. How could his proxy not be an angel? After the bow, Alger waited patiently for Oracle Danitz to bring him a silver-black mask. He received the mask and wore it solemnly. While wearing a red glove, Leonard strolled along the shores of mid-seashore, enjoying the R&R earned from closing a supernatural case. As for the mysterious opening of doors and windows last night, he had already received the orders from the Holy Cathedral not to pursue it through investigations or learn more about the matter. Regarding this order, Leonard couldn't do anything about it because he had long learned the general truth from old man Palaz Zoroast. Mr. Dor had returned to the real world, and Angel of Time Amen took the opportunity to steal his apotheosis ritual and advance to sequence 0 error. Almost at the same time, Mr. Fool awakened further. Through Saphira Castle, he had briefly and weakly connected to Beyonders of the Seer, Apprentice, and Marauder pathways. As an angel of the Marauder pathway, Palaz Zoroast was undoubtedly able to sense the changes in Amon's corresponding authority and his apotheosis. He also discovered that Saphira Castle had established a connection with him. Leonard took in the fresh morning air as he suppressed his voice and asked with a hint of concern and confusion,
Old man, Amon has already advanced to sequence 0. You shouldn't be of much use to him now. Why do you still want to parasitize my body?
In his mind, Palaz Zoroast scoffed.
Naive! Do you think that you don't need my guidance anymore after becoming a saint and having mastered a lot of mysticism knowledge?
You can choose to teach me face to face,
Leonard said after some deliberation. To him, having an angel parasitizing his body was both a boon and bane for him. The good thing was that even if he encountered a real mythical creature, he wouldn't be completely defenseless. As long as he softly shouted, "Old man," the problem might be resolved. In addition, history and various rare mysticism knowledge from the fourth epic were also rather useful. The greatest disadvantage was that his life was in the hands of the parasite. If the other party had any evil intentions, he couldn't stop it. This question was once Leonard's greatest worry, but it wasn't too problematic now. This was because Mr. Fool's awakening was deepening, allowing him to completely suppress Palaz Zoroast. Furthermore, Leonard had also become a high-ranking deacon of the Church of Evernight. He would definitely be under the watch of the Evernight goddess, and he could even be specially marked by her. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for a deity with the concealment authority to not discover Palez Zoroast. If Old Man had any nefarious thoughts, he would have been resolved long ago. What Leonard was most vexed about was that many things weren't too convenient as a result. Although he was already used to having an old man parasitizing his body, and he would even casually chat with him while on the toilet, he still preferred having that time to himself in such situations. Therefore, he felt that having Old Man leave his body and letting him live in his house like an elder would be a better way of getting along with him. When he needed to deal with more dangerous matters, he could get Old Man to temporarily parasitize him. Upon hearing Leonard's suggestion, Palez Zoroast scoffed.
Are you still thinking about removing the parasitizing when you return home? And parasitize when out? Do you think I'm your bodyguard?
Leonard laughed dryly before saying,
If you haven't fully recovered and wish to continue parasitizing, I have no objections.
Palez Zoroast fell silent for 2 seconds before his slightly aged voice resounded in Leonard's mind.
Next up is actually the most dangerous period. For the position of the Lord of the Mysteries, the Fool and Aemon will definitely have a battle. When the time comes, under the influence of all kinds of beyonder characteristics, angels of the same pathway might be affected. Hey, it's better to be kept under the protection of Evernight's gaze. When the Lord of the Mysteries is born, I won't even bother with you, even if you were to beg me to be parasitized.
Leonard was slightly taken aback as he subconsciously repeated the name.
Lord of the Mysteries?
This isn't something you can fully understand. Of course, with me around, there's no need to worry.
Palez Zoroast sighed and said with pride. Leonard was just about to take the opportunity to ask when he suddenly saw a Red Gloves team member running over with a telegram.
Reverend, a telegram from the Holy Cathedral.
The team member said respectfully, Chais. Leonard nodded slightly and received the telegram. He quickly scanned it. Head to the Southern Continent and participate in the besieging of the Rose School of Thought. Southern Continent, Rose School of Thought. Leonard narrowed down to 2 keywords. He quickly returned to the largest cathedral in this city and used large-scale ritualistic magic to establish a connection with the Holy Cathedral. In his dream, he met the Pope, Mom Ariana, and other high-ranking officials. After a simple exchange, Leonard roughly understood the essence of the mission. The various Orthodox churches would delegate 3 to 4 demigods to head to the Southern Continent to besiege the Rose School of Thought, which had become very active after the World War. This was a long-term mission. As the Rose School of Thought's demigods knew how to hide their tracks, they did things in a rather secretive manner. They weren't easy to locate or lock onto. It wasn't easy to deal with them either. According to what the Pope had said, it was already considered quite good to see enough results within 3 years. During this process, the Holy Cathedral would observe the situation and rotate demigods to ensure that the archbishops and high-ranking deacons were in a relatively stable mental state. After leaving the dream, Leonard looked around and suppressed his voice.
Old man, things are a little strange. Why would the various churches suddenly target the Rose School of Thought?
This wasn't an easy task. In the past few centuries, it wasn't as if the Orthodox churches hadn't made similar attempts, but they could only suppress and weaken them, without being capable of eradicating the Rose School of Thought. On the one hand, it was because there were cracks in their alliances. There was suspicion among each other and a lack of cooperation. On the other hand, due to the Rose School of Thought's demigods' indulgence, their mental states might be abnormal, but when faced with danger, they knew how to avoid, hide, and conceal. They wouldn't throw themselves into danger for no reason. In addition, with the blessings of the chained god and the mother tree of desire, it was difficult for the deities to provide precise guidance for their actions. Palez Zoroast didn't immediately answer Leonard's question. After about 10 seconds, he sighed and said with a slightly aged voice,
This is to eliminate potential threats and to prepare for the apocalypse.
Prepare for the apocalypse. Leonard turned agape and wanted to say something, but he eventually fell silent. Backland Harvest Church. Emlyn White had just entered the hall, but before he could head to his room and change his clothes, he saw Father Yutrovsky stand up in the front pew, like a mountain rising from the ground.
Earth Mother has instructed us to head to the southern continent and bury the evildoers.
The Blessed spoke in a low voice. His voice reverberated in the hall like a slow clap of thunder, causing the praying sanguine believers to open their eyes. So the dream last night was real. Emlyn was enlightened. Taze, last night he dreamed of the ancestor, and he dreamed that she wanted him to work with Father Yutrovsky and the Rose School of Thought's temperance faction, to head to the southern continent to deal with the Rose School of Thought members who believed in the primordial moon. Of course, if there was a chance, the enemies who believed in the Mother Tree of Desire would not be spared. As he often had fake revelations, Emlyn didn't take this dream to heart. He planned on changing his clothes and completing his prayers before seeking confirmation with Father Yutrovsky. He tersely acknowledged before replying to Father Yutrovsky in a rather composed manner.
There's no rush. I'll first contact the members of the Rose School of Thought's temperance faction.
Father Yutrovsky nodded nonchalantly and said,
Select some volunteer sanguine, too.
In the Intis Republic, in the capital, Trier, a supervisor of an intelligence agency was assigning tasks to his subordinates. Suddenly his vision blurred as he heard a distant voice ring in his ears.
Orville, Dylan. Orville, Dylan.
Chapter 1362, Witness. As a Beyonder who joined the Intis Public Security Bureau as a member of the Secret Order, it wasn't the first time that Antoine encountered something like that. In the past, whenever he advanced, he would hear Hornacis, Phlegrea, Hornacis, Phlegrea. He nearly lost control of himself several times. Unlike before, the content of the whispers seemed to have changed. After the ravings died down, everything in front of him returned to normal. Antoine frowned and muttered to himself,
My mental state has been very stable recently, and I haven't consumed the potion or attempted to advance. Why would I hear the whispers of a secret existence? This doesn't seem to be the same as before. What does Orville mean? I lack enough information. I can't understand it at all. Dylan. Yes, the brass of the Order have mentioned that our mysterious and terrifying leader once hid an ancient castle called Dylan. Teask. Once I recall that existence, I can't help but shiver. Although he has returned to normal in the past 2 years, the terrifying legends and physical destruction that he left behind is enough to give people a lifetime of nightmares.
Antoine calmed himself down and suppressed his puzzlement. He continued to assign missions to his subordinates. In front of a tombstone, Klein, who had just put down the white flowers, turned his head slightly, as though he was listening to something. Although he didn't hear anything, as a king of angels who wielded control over a portion of his pathway's authority, he could acutely sense that something was amiss. Some secret information was being transmitted to specific targets. Klein retracted his gaze and muttered to himself.
Zaratul isn't completely dead yet?
Back then, he had relied on his level, status, and authority to forcefully stop Zaratul's resurrection. He didn't sense anything abnormal, but after studying himself, he realized something problematic. The Beyonder characteristic he had absorbed from Zaratul was one that contained an entire set of sequence 9-to-1 Beyonder characteristics. That also meant that this only included a single miracle invoker Beyonder characteristic. And Snake of Fate Will Oseptin had mentioned that Zaratul and the ancestor of the Antigonus family had both taken an additional miracle invoker Beyonder characteristic in them. Therefore, the reality of the situation was that there was no doubt that there was an additional miracle invoker Beyonder characteristic on Zaratul which had vanished. As for whether there were any additional Beyonder characteristics like Scholar of Yore and Bizarro Sorcerer, Klein had no way of guessing due to his lack of understanding of Zaratul. Based on this situation, Klein had long suspected that Zaratul wasn't completely dead. Fishaler Aquaris, if the other party wanted to revive, it wouldn't be that simple. This was because using too simple a method would result in a lack of concealment. It would definitely be discovered by the higher sequence Beyonders of the same pathway, and thus an effective prevention method would be set up. When Zaratul was able to separate a Sequence 2 Beyonder characteristic from himself, he was undoubtedly a Sequence 1 attendant of mysteries. There weren't many enemies that could restrain him, ones that had to be dealt with using the most cautious of attitudes. Therefore, Klein believed that he had used the portion of the Beyonder characteristics that he had dissociated from himself to seize an opportunity. However, it wasn't to directly use it to revive. Instead, it was a way to make plenty of preparations. He needed an opportunity or some mediums to make the preparations play out. From the looks of it, he hid that portion of the Beyonder characteristic that contained the Miracle Invoker Beyonder characteristic in a particular manner and concealed it carefully.
Otherwise, when I advanced to Attendant of Mysteries, I should have been able to use Sapphira Castle to directly see it. Yes, the next step should be to use some concealed method to guide or entice a specific target to revive him. He hasn't accommodated a uniqueness, so he can't broadcast on all channels. Besides, he has to be sure that the advanced me, or Amon, doesn't hear the corresponding content and spoil his plans. Therefore, the number of targets he can entice is rather limited. All members of the Secret Order, or a portion of the members.
Klein, who was genuflecting, nodded in thought. He exhaled and grumbled without hiding anything.
Why are high-sequence Beyonders of the Seer pathway so difficult to kill?
There were all sorts of preparations and trump cards. This made him truly understand why the goddess didn't directly kill the ancestor of the Antigonus family. For the half-fool, death might mean a new lease of life.
However, an intricate and complicated setup often means that the ability to take risks is inferior. Who knows if Zaratul's resurrection plan will benefit some lucky Secret Order member? The possibility of this happening might even be higher than him returning from the fog of history. Also, there's a chance of being interfered, influenced, or exploited by the outer deities.
Klein sneered inwardly as he slowly stood up. He temporarily didn't have any thoughts of finding the Miracle Invoker Beyonder characteristic. This was because, under the immense pressure brought by Error Amon, he had no choice but to seize the opportunity to strengthen his humanity and stabilize his mental state. He had to head to Calderon City in the spirit world to retrieve the river water of the River of Eternal Darkness so as to accommodate the fool's uniqueness. He had no time to waste on non-urgent matters. By the time he successfully advanced and restored a new balance for the situation he was in, he didn't mind heading to Intis and dealing with the members of the Secret Order in search of the hidden treasure vault that Zaratul had hidden. This would completely put the angel who had lived since the Fourth Epoch to eternal rest. He reined in his thoughts and lowered his head to look at the tombstone in front of him. Klein slowly retreated, inserted his hand into his pocket, and turned to the side to enter the spirit world. In recent times, he was like a tourist in mysticism. Occasionally, he would return to where he used to be, and occasionally, under the guidance of fate, he would casually travel around the spirit world, heading to different realities to witness different scenes. As a result, his self-awareness and self-consciousness gradually recovered and solidified. He was now able to use his anchors to suppress the awakening will of the celestial worthy to a certain extent. This made his mind a lot more stable than when he met the Evernight goddess. In the spirit world, the saturated layers that resembled an abstract oil painting, Klein wandered aimlessly as he walked a few steps in a direction that wasn't in the usual meaning of the word direction. Following the guidance of fate and spirituality, he left this place and returned to the real world. The first thing that appeared before him was a small square and a cathedral belonging to the Evernight goddess. At this moment, many people were entering the cathedral, looking delighted.
I'm back in Backland?
Klein looked up at the sun that penetrated the thin clouds and followed the crowd to the cathedral's door. The moment he passed the entrance, his gaze suddenly froze. He saw Benson Moretti. The black-haired, brown-eyed man's face looked somewhat similar to Klein's. However, the slightly older-looking man had his hair combed neatly backward, revealing his broad forehead. He stood beside the altar, wearing a well-ironed suit, looking a little nervous. Klein stared for 2 seconds before quickly looking away. Following that, he swept his gaze across the front pew and saw Melissa in a white conservative dress. Compared to before, the young lady's face no longer had that adolescent look on it. There was more meat to her face, making her no longer look so skinny. She kept chatting with the people around her, skillfully handling all kinds of matters and socializing.
She still dresses in such an old-fashioned manner. Thankfully, she didn't wear black.
The corners of Klein's lips curled up as he mumbled. He walked to a corner of the cathedral and found a seat to sit down. About 10 minutes later, Melissa finished her work and sat in her seat. The joyous music started to play as it gradually turned solemn. A lady wearing a clean white wedding gown held her father's arm in one hand and held her mother's arm with her other. She walked down the aisle towards the altar. Benson, who was standing near the altar, gulped a mouthful of saliva and couldn't help but smile. This was his wedding. Klein, who was in the corner, saw this scene and leaned back a little. He lowered his head slightly and muttered,
He smiles like a curly-haired baboon.
After the bride was brought to the front of the altar by her parents, she bowed to Benson before facing the sacred emblem and the priest. Benson bowed and turned around. After the bride's parents sat down, the priest said,
Dear friends and family, we are gathered here today to witness and celebrate the union of this couple in marriage under the auspices of the benevolent goddess. Praise the Lady.
All the guests present raised their right hands as long as they were believers of the Evernight goddess, before drawing 4 points in a clockwise fashion, drawing out a star. This included Klein. When everyone settled down, the priest turned his head and said to the bride,
Do you, Lucy Brooke, take Benson Moretti to be your lawfully wedded husband, promising to love and cherish, through joy and sorrow, sickness and health, and whatever challenges you may face, for as long as you both shall live?
The lady named Lucy looked at the Evernight goddess's sacred emblem and nodded solemnly.
I do.
Benson's smile reappeared. The priest turned to look at him and said,
Do you, Benson Moretti, take Lucy Brooke to be your lawfully wedded wife, promising to love and cherish, through joy and sorrow, sickness and health, and whatever challenges you may face, for as long as you both shall live?
Benson immediately nodded and said,
I do.
Upon seeing this and hearing him, Melissa's vision turned blurry. Her heart winced along with joy. After going through all sorts of ups and downs, their family was finally welcoming a new member. Suddenly, she turned her head subconsciously to the corner and saw an empty seat. There was no one there. Melissa immediately pursed her lips and shook her head slightly. After scanning the area for several seconds, she slowly retracted her gaze and looked back at the altar. It wasn't until the priest announced that Benson and Lucy were man and wife did Melissa smile again. In the Hall family manor in Eastchester County, Klein walked out of the void. He had stabilized his mind and could now seek treatment from his psychiatrist. At the same time, he needed to solve a problem. Chapter 1363. Treatment Plan. On the veranda, covered by the autumn sun, Audrey wore a refreshing vacation straw hat and sat on a lawn chair as she leisurely flipped through a fashion magazine. There were exquisite pastries and a cup of black tea made from tea leaves from her family's manor on the round table beside her. Suddenly, she looked up to the edge of the veranda and saw Gehrman Sparrow walking over in a black trench coat and silk top hat. Audrey turned her head and glanced at her maid, Annie, and realized that she, like the servants around her, ignored the stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. At the same time, Audrey noticed that the surroundings seemed to darken a little. She stood up, lifting the corners of her skirt as she curtsied. During this process, she had originally planned on seriously discussing the matter between the psychology alchemists and Mr. Rath, but on second thought, she smiled again and said in that infectious and brisk tone,
Mr. World, are you here to seek psychological counseling or to deal with Mr. Rath's problem?
If it was just the former, Audrey believed that the World Gehrman Sparrow would let her meet him above the gray fog. That would be more convenient and faster. Therefore, this angel was definitely here under Mr. Fool's instructions to complete a mission in the real world. At the same time, she acutely sensed that Mr. World's emotions were rather mixed. He was satisfied and happy, yet depressed and sad. As Gehrman Sparrow's main doctor, this situation wasn't rare. It often meant that he needed a certain degree of counseling or comfort. Klein pulled a chair over and sat by the round table.
Both.
Audrey hadn't taken the initiative to investigate Mr. World. She had met Duane Dantes many times before. They had attended meetings, banquets, and dances together, and under the keen observation of a spectator, many details weren't secrets. She asked,
Do you want black tea or coffee?
for example, Audrey knew that when Duane Dantes was Gehrman Sparrow, he preferred food that was sweet with a little sourness. He liked to drink coffee with sugar without milk. For black tea, he loved having lemon slices. Out of all the pastries, his first choice was the cream pastries. He loved foie gras, roasted chicken skin, and loved ribeye steaks more than beef tenderloin. His love for desi pie far exceeded bread. In addition, Audrey was undoubtedly certain that the other party was a spice enthusiast. He had high expectations of condiments, and his preferences in this aspect were inclined towards that of Desi County. Due to these details, Audrey believed that it would be very rude to not invite Mr. World to enjoy the pastries on the table, and the beverage of choice to match these snacks was undoubtedly either black tea or coffee. Klein answered after some thought.
Black tea.
Miss Justice's relaxed and amiable attitude made him feel much more at ease. He felt that this state would be more beneficial for the subsequent placating. Since that was the case, it would definitely be better for him to enjoy the pastries while receiving psychological treatment. Audrey said to her maid, Annie,
Give me another cup of black tea and add a lemon slice.
Annie wasn't surprised by the instructions, finding everything reasonable. She turned around and walked to the veranda's entrance, giving instructions to the servants standing there. Audrey wasn't in a rush to begin the psychological treatment process, nor did she ask Mr. World why he was in a complicated mood. She smiled as she carefully introduced the local products of the manor. She made a comparison with Duane Dantes's Magor Manor, and naturally informed him of the present situation regarding his butler and servants. Some stayed in the manor and continued their previous work. With Magor Manor's production, it was perfectly fine sustaining them. There was even some surplus that could be converted to funds to repair the houses and be donated to charity organizations. Audrey only sent an accountant, an assistant butler, and a staff member from the foundation to do a check on them. Some felt that, without a true employer, they couldn't play their role to their fullest potential. They felt ashamed of the salary they received and chose to resign and look for work. Some of them developed an interest in charity work and found a new calling to life and joined one of the foundations under Audrey's name. Klein listened silently, occasionally raising a question, as though he was chatting with a friend. When the tea was served, he took a sip and nodded in satisfaction. After watching him eat a piece of cream cake, Audrey's green eyes darted around as she said with a smile,
Food doesn't seem to be necessary for an angel, right?
Klein answered simply before adding,
Yes, it's just a hobby. It can be used to maintain one's humanity.
Maintain one's humanity. Audrey ruminated over the sentence.
This is to resist the godhood within you? Your mental problems come under such a category?
She gently guided the topic to his psychological treatment. Klein nodded slightly and said,
That's right. You should have experienced it. Every Beyonder who has obtained godhood will definitely experience it in some way. The difference is in the quantity.
Audrey seriously recalled and said,
I occasionally dream of a ball of light that illuminated the entire world. Occasionally I would hear an indescribable sound, and I would see a blurry, strange, illusory ocean that seemed to contain many conflicting thoughts. I'm certain that it was an illusion, but it was also so real. Threestra. Well, I occasionally dream of a huge cross. I heard someone praying softly, but I couldn't tell the specifics, no matter how I tried.
The second is likely from the Sapphira, Chaos-C, and the indirect corruption from within. The third is visionary Adam beginning to exert influence on the Beyonders of the same pathway. The first one is the primordial one awakening in the ancient sun god's body, the ancient God Almighty.
Klein thought for a moment before saying in a deep voice,
The original creator created all living things and also split into various Beyonder characteristics. This is the source of being extraordinary. Therefore, every one of us has godhood in our bodies. They have the original Creator's will. The more Beyonder characteristics gathered, the more he will awaken and replace us.
He used the most common and most ambiguous method to explain the root of the problem in a way that wouldn't lead to corruption. This had been discussed to a certain extent at the Tarot Club, so Audrey didn't find it difficult to understand. She said thoughtfully,
That's why one needs to use one's humanity to resist godhood. At the same time, anchors are needed.
Klein explained the two different situations.
Yes, the light you dream of, the indescribable sounds you hear, and the illusory ocean that you see are all a type of corruption. And the gigantic cross and prayer sounds should be a result of the influence that visionary Adam has on the Beyonders of the same pathway.
Audrey subconsciously sat up straight and looked around. She appeared a little afraid. Gehrman Sparrow actually said the name of the He Who Must Not Be Named. Klein explained.
Don't worry, he can't hear me with me by your side.
Audrey retracted her gaze and didn't hide her surprise and astonishment.
You've already advanced to Sequence 1? Isn't that too fast? He had only become a Sequence 2 angel slightly more than half a year ago.
Klein answered frankly.
More like a king of angels.
Audrey was silent for a few seconds. She pursed her lips and said with a vexed smile,
I nearly had a psychological problem just now.
Klein chuckled as well.
To me, becoming a king of angels isn't necessarily a good thing. Yes, high-sequence Beyonders of the spectator pathway have to pay particular attention to their mental state. To other pathways, the enhancement of godhood and the worsening corruption is rather obvious. But this isn't the case for a spectator. You have to constantly inspect and check yourself. Any tiny changes to one's personality and their understanding of things should be traced back to the source. It must be confirmed that there are no problems, and that the difference can be considered a normal change. Otherwise, you'll unknowingly become another person who can coldly kill those who you originally wanted to protect. It's not easy for Beyonders of the spectator pathway to go crazy, but it's also the easiest for them to go crazy.
Audrey replied in shock.
I understand.
She continued the topic and began asking,
Your mental state is unstable, and you have a psychological problem. Is it because you became a king of angels in such a short period of time that it exceeded your expectations?
Klein drank a mouthful of black tea and said,
Yes, the will that doesn't belong to me within me has mostly awakened. I can only barely suppress it and maintain some basic level of mental stability.
As Audrey listened to Gehrman Sparrow's description, she used her Beyonder powers to observe and analyze him. After the other party finished speaking, she revealed a comforting smile and said,
I roughly understand your current situation. The initial treatment plan is divided into 2 steps. I'll first enter your mind world and awaken the memories related to your humanity. Oh, it doesn't include the kind that will make you so miserable that you wish to give up. Then, when your godhood reacts, I'll use placate, hypnotism, and other Beyonder powers to reduce the corruption and the negative effects it brings, so as to help you better suppress it.
Klein was silent for a moment before saying,
Okay.
He decided to use his unique trait of maintaining lucidity in the dream and the mind world and first gather up the memories related to the Fool before grafting them to the worms of spirit above the gray fog. At that moment, Audrey got her maid, Annie, to bring over a white silk scarf. Then she used the thin scarf to cover her eyes and ears. Klein watched this scene in puzzlement as he waited for Miss Justice to explain. Matri? After tying the scarf, Audrey smiled and said,
This is a hypnotism that allows me to seal my spirit body's perception. This way, even if I were to enter your mind world, I wouldn't be able to hear or see those awakened memories. Of course, I'll keep my spiritual intuition. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to find your island of consciousness, and I wouldn't be able to sense the changes in your godhood. I could have just hypnotized you, but you're already a king of angels. I'm worried that I'll be affected by your consciousness, so I'm using this symbolic ritual to achieve the state of being hypnotized and strengthen the effects.
She calmly explained, calming Klein's mood without him realizing it. He nodded gently and said,
All right, let's begin.
Chapter 1364, Proactive Klein. After opening the door to the body of heart and mind, Klein carefully extracted the memories related to the fool. He gathered them together and grafted them above the gray fog. Following that, he saw the blonde-haired Audrey, who had a light white silk scarf covering her eyes, appear on the ancient stone steps. Step by step, she landed onto his mind island via the sea of collective subconscious. After some hesitation, Klein no longer allowed his consciousness to stay high in the sky. He gave up the corresponding control and allowed them to return and fuse together. If he didn't do that, he would maintain absolute rationality in the subsequent treatment, making him unable to be moved by all kinds of memories and lose the possibility of strengthening his humanity. This meant that Audrey's treatment was destined to fail right from the start. After arriving at the mind island that resembled a dream world, using her spiritual intuition, Audrey stopped and spread her arms slightly. She recalled her parents, love for her, the excitement she felt when she first became a Beyonder, and the joy she felt after helping others to change her emotions and emit corresponding fluctuations. This was a method of awakening Gehrman Sparrow's memories related to his humanity. It was a Beyonder manifestation of the effects of empathy. Scenes that were worth cherishing, or those hiding deep within, flashed across Audrey's mind one after another. Beneath her feet, from the surface of the island that represented Klein's mind, firefly-like light points seeped out of the soil and floated up. Every point of light presented a different scene: a kid taking a stride forward with his short legs, receiving an ice cream; a student secretly reading novels and comics under the cover of a textbook; a teenager sitting in front of his computer and playing games with full focus. Hearing the sound of a key suddenly being inserted into a keyhole, he jumped up and performed a forced shutdown on his computer. Rushing back to his room, happy that his actions weren't discovered, he had a bounce in his step. Going to the living room, he asked his mother for pocket money before appearing beside his father to casually ask questions about his studies. A young adult and his companions pushing a bashful friend to the corridor, right up to the person he had a crush on. Then, turning around, he laughed loudly. A young adult with some hint of adolescence to him, stealing a glance downstairs, watching a figure leave, but unable to open his mouth no matter what. An employee with a slightly protruding belly, waving his hand impatiently when he returned home for the holidays. After telling his parents not to serve him food or set up blind dates for him, he sees his parents' white hair and loses himself in thought when he calmed down. A scholarly-looking man and his brother and sister moving out. When they saw the dirt and dust on each other's faces, they laughed. Klein sat at the round table at the veranda, one hand holding his top hat and the other hanging in midair, as though he wanted to cover his face. Two transparent drops of water slowly slid past the two sides of his nose bridge and dripped into the void. Klein closed his eyes, his expression soft and pained. In his mind island, Audrey seemed to have transformed into a whirlpool of emotions as she pulled together similar memories. After the entire island was covered in firefly-like points of light, a faint gray fog emerged. In the fog there was a door of light that was dyed bluish-black. It was formed from illusory and brilliant spherical light. The main body of each spherical light was composed of transparent ringed or starlight-like worms and insects. They embraced each other and intertwined like mythical creatures. The door of light looked a little odd at first glance, but if one looked closely, they would discover that its surroundings were dark. It was as though it was wearing a hooded black robe. Thus, on a whole, it looked like an unknown mysterious person hiding under a robe. In the next second, a slippery, illusory tentacle appeared under the deep black robe of the mysterious person. At that moment, although Audrey's consciousness couldn't see or hear anything, her spiritual intuition gave her a strong sense of danger. She had a feeling that a sea consisting of corruption was about to drown her.
No, this isn't an illusion.
She believed that if things continued to develop like this, she would get infected with a severe mental illness or even lose control and go crazy on the spot. Audrey was just about to placate herself with all her might, weakening the corruption ahead of her, when the firefly-like light dots floating above the island rapidly gathered. They illuminated the grayish-white fog, diluting the darkness around the strange door of light, making the tentacles covered in mysterious patterns shrink back. This was also the reason why Klein could receive psychological treatment only after barely suppressing the awakening celestial worthy's consciousness. This made Audrey sense the weakening of the danger, and she quickly did a psychoanalysis. Then, she immediately placated the corruption, performing a true act of hypnosis. After repeating it over and over again, Audrey took an unknown amount of time before she finally managed to obtain the initial results she expected. She then left Gehrman Sparrow's mind island and returned to her body. This treatment was very difficult, so she didn't use a virtual persona and directly used her body of heart and mind. After sensing the end of the treatment, Klein raised his hand to wipe his face, allowing the fool's memories grafted above the gray fog to return to his true body. A few seconds later, Audrey removed the white silk scarf wrapped around her eyes and nose, snapping herself out of her self-hypnosis. She looked at Mr. World opposite her and muttered to herself poignantly,
"Is this the mental problem brought by godhood? How terrifying."
Klein nodded slightly and said,
Yes, every angel has one. The only difference is whether it's serious or very serious.
Saints have it too. Even low and mid-sequence beyonders who aren't demigods will have it too.
Audrey added with Gehrman Sparrow's former explanation.
To a low or mid-sequence beyonder, the remnant mental imprint of the former owner of the characteristic is relatively more dangerous.
Klein picked up the gold-lined cup and took a sip.
This is the cruel law of the mysterious world. This is because our beyonder powers come from external objects, from the beyonder characteristics.
Audrey nodded before shaking her head gently. As she contemplated, she said,
I don't think it's that pessimistic. Just like the source of every human life comes from something else, air, bread, meat, water, etc. When we absorb them, we will also absorb their negative effects, accumulating all kinds of problems that eventually make us fall sick. However, this doesn't mean that we have to completely resist them and treat them as external objects. Once they're absorbed, there will always be some part of it that belongs to us. I didn't express it well, but I believe you should understand what I mean.
Klein was taken aback for a moment before replying thoughtfully,
A beyonder's acquisition of a beyonder characteristic is like humans having food. Then one should have peace of mind and not have too many repulsive thoughts. It's about resisting it, but also working alongside it, and suppressing it, but also fusing together with it.
Roughly like that.
After Audrey said that, she laughed self-deprecatingly.
However, this also seems to imply a negative message. Humans will eventually die, but beyonders.
She didn't finish her sentence, unwilling to agitate the patient opposite her. Kachki, Sefka, Kachki, Shars. She switched topics and said,
Pay a visit another 2 times this week. I'll be able to stabilize you under normal conditions. Yes, normal conditions. Also, you can reminisce about things when you're free, or go somewhere you yearn to go.
Klein nodded and said,
What do you have in mind about Rath's suggestion?
The smile on Audrey's face slowly disappeared, as her expression gradually turned serious.
Do you have any suggestions?
Klein put down his teacup and calmly said,
Strictly speaking, the danger you bring is divided into 2 categories. One is when you actively or passively involve yourself in certain matters, attracting powerful enemies to your side, implicating your family, relatives, friends, and the innocent. The other is that your very existence allows some factions to target the people you value the most, doing so to threaten you. For the latter, unless you're dead, there's no way for you to ever avoid them. Of course, most of these things are a result of the former. If you give up on all your current identities in the mysticism world, and only be Mr. Fool's believer and Miss Audrey Hall from now on, no longer taking the initiative to participate in matters related to beyonder or other matters with unpredictable elements, you can avoid most of the risks of the former and drastically reduce the latter. Under such circumstances, with the Evernight goddess favoring the Hall family and Mr. Fool's protection provided to you is enough to deal with the rare instances of dangers, ensuring your family's safety. That's why there's no need to split off another identity.
Audrey fell silent for a while. She bit her lower lip indiscernibly and asked,
What if I do want to split off an identity?
As long as you let that identity believe in Mr. Fool, it's not much different from what I said just now. The only difference is that, from this point forth, you'll have to stay away from your family and friends and live with another identity.
Klein's voice sank slightly as he said in a serious tone,
Also, are you really fine with Hermes splitting off an identity for you?
Audrey's emotions were disrupted by this question. Her eyes flickered as she said,
However, splitting identities should be beyond her powers of a Sequence 3 Dreamweaver. She definitely wouldn't be able to accomplish it by herself.
The corners of Klein's mouth curled up as he suddenly asked,
You're able to use that pride mask to enter the Garden of Eden directly?
As Audrey couldn't take the initiative to mention the psychology alchemists, he very directly pointed it out. Audrey nodded gently, surprised, puzzled, and guessed something.
I'm unable to pay the equivalent price, and...
Without waiting for her to finish, Klein said with a cold expression,
On the one hand, Adam has drifted from Mr. Fool and nearly killed me. On the other hand, with the apocalypse approaching, Mr. Fool has prophesied something. When the time comes, he might fall asleep again. As his blessed, I won't be able to escape a similar fate. The payment you need to pay is that, when such an anomaly happens, perform certain dangerous things according to Mr. Fool's instructions, and try hard to awaken him.
Without giving Miss Justice a chance to digest this sentence, Klein extended his right hand and grabbed a few times at the void ahead of him, pulling out a grayish-white, cold persona mask. Using his status and Audrey's trust in him, he forcefully summoned the projection of the pride mask from the historical void.
It's connected to my mind, so no one else can use it.
Audrey subconsciously pointed out the problem when she saw this.
Give me a strand of hair.
Klein said calmly. Audrey didn't think too much about it. She plucked out a strand of blonde hair and handed it to Gehrman Sparrow. Klein took the strand of hair and wrapped it in the eye holes in the persona mask. Then he held his silk hat in one hand and the grayish-white mask in the other as he slowly stood up. During this process, he mobilized Saphira Castle and deceived the rules. Paw! Klein wore the pride mask without facing any resistance. Immediately, he saw human-clothed animals walking upright. He had entered the Garden of Eden directly. Looking at the black cathedral in the middle of the city, Klein curled his lips and took out the Staff of the Stars and wore the silk top hat over his head. Chapter 1365, Destruction. The moment they sensed the intrusion of a stranger, the animals wearing cloaks or exquisite long skirts stirred as they looked at Klein with the desire to attack. At that instant, Klein, who was wearing the pride mask, felt as though he was an enemy of the entire city. He wasn't unfamiliar with the situation in the Garden of Eden. He knew that the upright animals dressed as humans were in different aspects of bestial desires. They were more like conceptual and abstract entities instead of being physical. In other words, they didn't have spirit-body threads, so they wouldn't suffer any physical harm. Otherwise, Klein could have hoisted these animals up, allowing them to sway with the wind. In the next second, with the bear whose suit was about to rip apart taking the lead, the animals in the Garden of Eden either bared their fangs or let out low growls as they surged towards Klein from all directions. Once bitten or hugged by them, one would be corrupted by the corresponding bestial desire. One could only rely on their willpower or the various beyonder powers of the spectator pathway to resist them. Faced with such a situation, Klein, who was wearing a half-top hat, tapped the Staff of the Stars. Without panicking in the slightest, he raised his left hand, spread his fingers, and suddenly closed them. The Garden of Eden, formed from Gothic-style architecture, was suddenly covered in a layer of gloom as if a giant curtain had draped over it. Realm of the mysteries, the embryonic form of a divine kingdom, Klein sealed off the Garden of Eden to prevent the powerhouses inside from escaping. Following that, he walked forward one step at a time, like a gentleman taking an after-meal stroll. The animals who mimicked humans by wearing human clothes rushed to his side when they naturally changed directions and embraced each other. The python, with its flicking tongue, devoured a canine creature filled with the desire to mate. The strange person with a colorful spider as a face bound a huge, red-eyed rat up with a web. A violent werewolf bit the languid cat. The brown bear, walking upright, gave the fox with shiny fur a bear hug. These animals that represented bestial desire fused together as they canceled each other out in pairs. Klein, who had grasped the authority of grafting, slowly walked through them, as though he was inspecting the concepts of humanity and bestial desires. Just like that, he walked to the 80-meter-tall cathedral and stopped. Then he lifted his head and looked at the skulls embedded in the black pillar for 2 seconds. Klein's expression didn't change at all. He raised his left hand to press down his hat and walked up the stairs into the cathedral. He immediately saw a grand and spacious hall, with a huge cross and a grayish-white dragon statue wrapped around the cross. In front of the cross was a small, long table, with 5 seats on both sides of the long table. At this moment, at the end of the long table, there was a man in a black wheelchair. His face was abnormally pale, and his pale yellow eyebrows were long. His hair was neatly combed, and there were some wrinkles on his forehead. This was the leader of the psychology alchemists, Pauli Derlau. At the same time, he was also the famous hermit Eric Drake and the king of the Black Throne, Barrows Hopkins. Of course, whether he was the main body or one of his various identities, no one knew. Seeing German Sparrow, who was wearing a silk top hat and a black trench coat, walk over slowly and in an extremely oppressive manner, Pauli Derlau clasped the armrest of the wheelchair with both hands. When the other party entered the Garden of Eden, he didn't hesitate to leave this mind city, but he failed to do so. The eyes beneath the pride mask that seemed to move towards his forehead seemed to be mocking him. Phew! Pauli Derlau quickly placated his emotions before his eyes lit up with a pure, illusory light. This light formed a pair of holy wings in front of him. Under the layers of wings there was a pious person of light genuflecting in prayer. This was an angel. At the same time, an elder with white hair and ordinary looks appeared to the left of Pauli Derlau. To his right, a priest with a pale blonde beard covering his face stood up. Ancient angel Hermes, visionary Adam! Klein didn't stop walking forward as he muttered to himself.
I wish for all illusions to disappear.
Just as he said that, he raised his left hand and snapped his fingers. The angel of light, Hermes, and visionary Adam instantly dissipated and vanished, leaving behind a single Pauli Derlau sitting in the black wheelchair. He had just used the beyonder powers of a dreamweaver to weave a few almost realistic images. Once the enemy believed that they were real, they would become real. Although the damage they caused didn't have any physical manifestations, it would make the target die for unknown reasons. Pauli Derlau has made countless targets die from fright in such nightmares. Unfortunately, he had encountered Klein, a king of angels who could maintain his lucidity in dreams and also possessed true vision. He used the wishes power of a miracle invoker to easily crack the illusion. Seeing this, Pauli Derlau's eyelids twitched. Without any hesitation, he pushed himself up from the black wheelchair. During this process, his body rapidly expanded as he transformed into a huge grayish-white dragon. Dragon transformation, an incomplete mythical creature form. Compared to a Sequence 4 manipulator, the incomplete mythical creature form that Pauli Derlau exhibited was even larger. Furthermore, there was a certain change to his head, making it closer to a lizard and not a human. It had golden vertical pupils and scales that were intertwined with mysterious patterns, making it cold and warped. As the incomplete mythical creature form appeared, all kinds of thoughts, consciousness, desires, and wills swept out like a storm. attacking Klein's mind island in half illusory and half realistic ways. This was a combination of mind deprivation and mental plague, allowing every creature that was affected to experience corruption and go crazy on the spot. To an angel, such attacks were the most sinister. This was because all of them had certain problems with their mental states. They could lose control at any moment due to the tilting of the scales. Klein, who was wearing the grayish-white pride mask and half-top hat, didn't stop walking forward. He didn't attempt to avoid the plague storm at the mental level. He remained firm and stoic as he walked step by step towards Polly Durlau. In the next second, transparent insects appeared on the back of his hand. His clothes expanded as though countless indescribable monsters were crawling underneath. Suddenly, Klein lost control and turned into a huge whirlpool formed by transparent maggots. The vortex extended out slippery tentacles with strange patterns. In the middle, there was a door of light that was dyed bluish-black. Upon seeing this scene, even in his incomplete mythical creature form, Polly Durlau found it difficult to stop his thoughts from coming to a halt as he stood rooted to the ground. The massive grayish-white dragon seemed to have become a puppet. Its head was filled with mush, and its joints were all rusted. He had stared straight at a great existence that he shouldn't look at. Above the gray fog, Klein, who was sitting at the fool's seat, immediately dispersed the out-of-control historical projection. After entering the Garden of Eden and pulling out the Staff of the Stars, he had switched places with the historical void projection that the worms of spirit inside Sapphira Castle had summoned, and directly returned to his ancient palace. He clearly knew that visionary Adam had gone to the forsaken land of the gods and was attempting to fuse with the true Creator, making it impossible for him to descend with his true body any time in the short foreseeable future. At most, he would send out one of his other identities, but it would be useless against a king of kings of angels. However, Klein still felt that he should be cautious, lest he fall into Adam's or Amon's trap. Following that, he summoned himself from the fog of history. He wore the pride mask and held the Staff of the Stars in his hand as he projected himself back into the cathedral of the Garden of Eden. Seeing that Polly Durlau had lost most of his rationality and was unable to control his body, Klein didn't directly control his spirit-body threads to turn the mind dragon into his marionette. He maintained his pace as he slowly approached the target. In Polly Durlau's eyes, Gehrman Sparrow was like death incarnate. He approached him slowly with his own rhythm, but there was no chance of escape. At that moment, the grayish-white dragon statue on the huge cross behind him moved. Almost simultaneously, Klein raised his left hand and pulled downwards. The shadow curtain that enveloped the Garden of Eden instantly contracted, enveloping the huge cross, the grayish-white dragon statue, and Polly Durlau within. In the next second, Klein raised the curtain. The incomplete mythical creature that Polly Durlau had transformed into, combined with the gigantic cross as though it was a knotted giant tree, and the grayish-white dragon statue connected the entirety of the Garden of Eden, turning the city outside the cathedral into an abnormally illusory sea that contained all colors. This wasn't the Chaos Sea, rather the loaning of its strength. It had been tampered by Klein and reassembled. At that moment, Gehrman Sparrow, who had been walking slowly forward, arrived beside the knotted giant tree. He raised his right hand, and under the vacant yet slightly fearful gaze of Polly Durlau, he lashed out with the Staff of the Stars. This cane, that was embedded with many gems, hit the target heavily, separating it into two. Between the sounds of parts falling to the ground, Polly Durlau's body that had been combined with the huge cross fell to the ground. The leader of the psychology alchemists died before he could even say his last words. While waiting for Polly Durlau's Beyonder characteristic to appear, Klein looked around and chuckled inwardly. As expected, Hermes' true goal was to use the faction backing Miss Justice to destroy the Garden of Eden and use it to escape from Adam. The mind dragon, Arihog's words, made him steel his resolve.
However, he should have still left a few sealed artifacts for me. There's no need to abscond with everything. Could it be that the rabbit should be wearing a greed mask instead of wrath?
The psychology alchemists might appear again in the future, but the one controlling it in the shadows is no longer the Twilight Hermit Order, but Hermes himself.